If you're in a season where you've been praying, believing, fasting, hoping, and nothing seems to be moving, this message is for you. Some of you walked in here with a question you don't even say out loud anymore. God, why is it taking so long? You did what you were supposed to do. You stayed faithful. You kept your integrity. You kept showing up. And yet the door hasn't opened. The promise hasn't happened. The breakthrough hasn't come. But can I tell you something that might shift your perspective? A delay is not a denial. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Sometimes when God delays your blessing, it's because He's developing you. We love the promise, but we don't love the process. We want the crown, but we don't want the crushing. We want the platform, but we don't want the preparation. Yet every great blessing carries a weight, and if God gave it to you too soon, it would crush you instead of elevate you. Think about Joseph. He had a dream from God. A clear promise. But between the dream and the destiny there was a pit, there was slavery, there was prison. It looked like God had forgotten him. It looked like the promise was cancelled. But every delay was building something in him that the palace required. Maybe the reason it feels slow is because your future is big. We interpret delay as punishment, but sometimes it's protection. If God had answered that prayer 5 years ago, you wouldn't have been ready. If He had given you that relationship back then, you would have ruined it. If He had opened that door before now, you would have walked through it with the wrong mindset. Delay is not wasted time. It's construction time. God is more interested in who you're becoming than in what you're receiving. Because if your character can't sustain your calling, your blessing will become a burden. So while you're asking God to change your situation, He might be changing you. And I know, it's hard to celebrate what you can't see. It's hard to trust when the silence is loud. But faith grows in the waiting. Strength grows in the stretching. Patience grows in the pause. Look at Abraham. He was given a promise of a son, but the fulfillment didn't happen overnight. Years passed. Doubts crept in. Questions surfaced. Yet the delay wasn't random, it was purposeful. When the promise finally arrived, it was clear that only God could have done it. Sometimes God waits so that when it happens, there's no confusion about where it came from. We shout over sudden miracles, but we rarely appreciate slow miracles. The kind where your attitude changes. The kind where your discipline grows. The kind where your faith deepens. The kind where you don't look like what you've been through. You're not behind. You're being built. If the blessing is delayed, maybe it's because the assignment is significant. If the answer is delayed, maybe the impact is greater than you imagined. God doesn't prepare small vessels for big callings, He enlarges them. So don't quit in the waiting room. Don't let frustration make you forfeit what faith was building. The enemy wants you to believe that the silence means absence. But silence does not mean inactivity. Just because you can't see God moving doesn't mean He's not arranging, aligning, and orchestrating things you could never manage on your own. While you're waiting, worship. While you're waiting, work. While you're waiting, grow. Because when God finally releases what He promised, it won't just be a blessing in your hand, it will be a testimony in your mouth. And one day you'll look back at this season you almost resented, and realize it was the very season that shaped you for everything you prayed for. Delay is not denial. When God delays your blessing, it does not mean He has rejected you, ignored you, or forgotten what He promised. It means the timing is still under construction. We live in a culture that celebrates instant results. If it doesn't happen quickly, we assume it's not meant to happen. But God has never been rushed by human impatience. What feels late to you is often perfectly aligned in eternity. Sometimes we interpret silence as rejection. We think, if it hasn't happened yet, maybe it's not going to happen at all. But delay and denial are not the same thing. A denial closes the door permanently. A delay simply means the door is not ready to open. And the difference between those two can change your entire mindset. Because when you understand that it's not a rejection but a refinement of timing, you stop panicking and start trusting. God's promises are not fragile. They are not dependent on your timeline. They are anchored in His purpose. When He speaks something over your life, it carries intention. But intention always requires preparation. The gap between the promise and the fulfillment is not empty space, it is sacred space. It is where growth happens. It is where faith deepens. It is where character is shaped. Think about Joseph. He received a dream, but the dream did not manifest immediately. There were years of confusion, betrayal, and isolation. If Joseph had interpreted the delay as denial, he might have given up in the pit or in the prison. But the delay was positioning him. The timing had to align with a famine, a kingdom, and a divine plan larger than his personal comfort. What looked like a setback was actually synchronization. Delay protects you from premature arrival. If the blessing comes before you are ready, it can overwhelm you. If the door opens before your foundation is solid, you may step into something you cannot sustain. God is not withholding from you, He is preparing you. He is strengthening your shoulders so you can carry what you've been praying for. He is expanding your capacity so that when the blessing arrives, it does not crush you, it elevates you. And sometimes the delay is about alignment. There are people who need to be in position. Circumstances that need to shift. Lessons that need to be learned. Healing that needs to take place. You see one piece of the puzzle, God sees the entire picture. You see today, He sees generations. So instead of asking, why is this taking so long? Begin asking, what is this season building in me? Because delay is not wasted time. It is preparation time. It is trust building time. It is foundation laying time. The promise is still alive, even if it feels quiet. Just because it hasn't happened yet does not mean it won't happen. It simply means God is working on a timeline that ensures when it finally comes, it will be undeniable, sustainable, and perfectly timed. God develops you before He delivers to you. We often focus on the blessing itself, the opportunity, the breakthrough, the relationship, the platform, but heaven is focused on the person who will carry it. Because what you receive can either elevate you or expose you, depending on who you've become in the process. It's easy to pray for increase. It's harder to prepare for it. Increase multiplies everything, including weaknesses. If there are cracks in your character, success will magnify them. If there is insecurity in your heart, influence will reveal it. That's why development always comes before delivery. God loves you too much to hand you something that could harm you because you weren't ready for it. You might be asking for more responsibility, but are you stewarding what you have right now? You might be praying for a bigger opportunity, but are you faithful in the small one? Development happens in the unseen places. It happens in daily discipline, quiet obedience, and private integrity. Nobody applauds you there. Nobody notices the small choices. But those small choices are shaping the strength you will need later. Look at David. Before he ever stood on a battlefield or wore a crown, he was in a field. Alone, tending sheep, learning responsibility, learning courage, learning to trust God when no one else was watching. The field was not a delay, it was development. If he had skipped the field, he would not have been ready for the giant. If he had skipped the giant, he would not have been ready for the throne. God is not just preparing circumstances around you, He is shaping capacity within you. Every challenge you face is building resilience. Every disappointment is teaching endurance. Every season of obscurity is strengthening humility. These are not random experiences, they are intentional layers of preparation. Sometimes we think the blessing itself will change us. We think, once I get there, I'll be ready. But readiness doesn't come after arrival. It comes before it. The process is what qualifies you to sustain what you prayed for. Without development, delivery becomes destruction. With development, delivery becomes destiny. You may feel overlooked right now. You may feel like you're stuck in a season that doesn't match your vision. But don't despise this stage. This is where the real work is happening. Roots grow deeper before trees grow taller. Foundations are laid before buildings rise. Strength is built before weight is added. Instead of rushing God to release the blessing, allow Him to refine the vessel. Let Him correct your motives. Let Him strengthen your patience. Let Him expand your perspective. The waiting is not wasted, it's training. The pressure is not punishment, it's preparation. When the blessing finally comes, you won't just have what you prayed for. You'll have the wisdom to manage it, the character to protect it, and the maturity to multiply it. And that is why development must always come before delivery. Delay is often protection in disguise. What feels like frustration to you may actually be mercy from God. We tend to assume that every closed door is a missed opportunity, every postponed answer is a setback, and every interruption is a problem. But what if some of the things that didn't happen were the very things that saved you? You see disappointment. God sees danger. You see inconvenience. God sees incompleteness. Sometimes we are so focused on what we want that we don't recognize what we're not ready for. If certain prayers had been answered exactly when you asked, you might have stepped into situations that would have overwhelmed you, distracted you, or even broken you. There are relationships you thought you needed that would have drained you. Opportunities you thought were perfect that would have compromised you. Doors you begged God to open that would have led you somewhere beneath your calling. Delay is not always about timing alone, sometimes it's about safeguarding your future. Consider Abraham. He was given a promise, but the fulfillment required patience. If the promise had come too early, the weight of it might have crushed his faith instead of strengthening it. The waiting period was not random, it was intentional. It stretched him. It matured him. It positioned him so that when the promise arrived, he could recognize it, steward it, and honor the one who gave it. Protection doesn't always feel good. In fact, it can feel like rejection. It can feel like silence. It can feel like loss. But sometimes God closes a door not because you failed, but because He is faithful. Faithful to the bigger picture. Faithful to the long-term plan. Faithful to protect you from temporary desires that could create permanent consequences. Think about how many times you've looked back and said, "Now I understand why that didn't work out." In the moment, it hurt. In the moment, it confused you. But later you realized it was divine redirection. Delay has a way of revealing its purpose over time. God's perspective is eternal, yours is immediate. You focus on today's discomfort. He focuses on tomorrow's impact. You focus on what feels urgent. He focuses on what is truly important. And because He sees what you cannot see, He sometimes says, "Wait," when you're saying, "Now." The pause is not passive. It is active protection. While you're waiting, God is aligning circumstances, correcting paths, removing hidden obstacles, and strengthening weak areas. What you think is stagnation may actually be spiritual insulation, keeping you safe from harm you didn't even know was coming. So instead of resenting the delay, begin to trust the protection. Trust that the one who loves you most would never withhold something good without a reason. Trust that if it hasn't happened yet, there may be something greater being arranged. The delay might not be a barrier, it might be a shield. Faith grows strongest in waiting seasons. It's easy to believe when the evidence is visible. It's easy to worship when the breakthrough has already arrived. But real faith is not built in the moment of fulfillment, it is built in the stretch between the promise and the manifestation. Waiting exposes what you truly believe. When nothing around you changes, do you still trust that God is working? When prayers seem unanswered, do you still hold on to His word? Anyone can celebrate when doors open. But can you stay consistent when they remain closed? Waiting tests your motives. It tests your patience. It tests your endurance. And through that testing, faith is strengthened like a muscle under resistance. Without resistance, muscles don't grow. Without waiting, faith remains shallow. Look at Hannah. She prayed year after year for a child. The delay was painful. It was public. It was emotional. Yet in that waiting season, her faith deepened. She didn't allow bitterness to take root. She kept bringing her request before God. And when her prayer was finally answered, it was clear that her faith had been forged in the fire of waiting. The blessing was powerful, but the growth that happened in her during the delay was even more profound. Waiting teaches you to rely on God's character instead of your circumstances. Circumstances change. Feelings fluctuate. But God's nature remains constant. When you don't see progress, you learn to trust His promises. When you don't hear clear answers, you learn to lean on what He has already spoken. Faith in the waiting says, "Even if I don't see it, I believe He is faithful." There is something transformative about staying planted when everything in you wants to run. The waiting season refines your focus. It removes distractions. It clarifies priorities. It forces you to confront fears and surrender control. Because often, what makes waiting difficult is not the time itself, it's the lack of control. We want to manage outcomes. We want to predict results. But faith requires surrender. In the waiting, you learn perseverance. You learn consistency. You learn to show up even when you don't feel immediate reward. And those qualities are essential for sustaining any blessing. If everything happened instantly, you would never develop resilience. You would never learn endurance. You would never discover the depth of your own trust. Waiting is not spiritual inactivity. It is active trust. It is choosing to believe when logic questions and emotions waver. It is declaring that God's silence does not cancel his sovereignty. It is holding on to hope when evidence is limited. When the breakthrough finally comes, your faith will not be fragile, it will be fortified. Because it was shaped not by instant gratification, but by patient endurance. And faith built in waiting is faith that lasts. Your future may be bigger than your current capacity. Sometimes the size of the delay reflects the size of the destiny attached to your life. We often measure progress by speed, assuming that if something is taking a long time, it must not be significant. But in God's economy, length of preparation often signals weight of assignment. The greater the calling, the deeper the roots must grow. Imagine trying to place a massive structure on a shallow foundation. It might look impressive at first, but pressure would eventually expose its weakness. In the same way, if God were to release a heavy blessing on a light foundation, it could collapse under its own weight. Influence requires humility. Success requires stability. Expansion requires endurance. Capacity must increase before territory does. Sometimes you feel stuck because you're comparing your timeline to someone else's. You see others moving ahead, doors opening for them, opportunities unfolding quickly. But comparison blinds you to calling. What God is building in you may require more reinforcement. What He is preparing you for may demand more resilience. The waiting period is not proof that you're behind, it may be proof that your assignment is substantial. Consider Moses. Before he led a nation, he spent years in obscurity. Years in the wilderness. Years tending sheep. From the outside, it looked like lost time. But those wilderness years were increasing his capacity. They were teaching him patience, leadership, and dependence on God. If he had stepped into leadership too soon, without that formation, the weight of guiding an entire people might have crushed him. The delay was not punishment, it was preparation proportionate to the purpose. God enlarges you internally before He expands you externally. He stretches your mindset. He strengthens your discipline. He refines your character. And stretching is uncomfortable. Growth always is. When something expands, it feels tight before it feels natural. The discomfort you feel right now may not be stagnation, it may be expansion happening beneath the surface. The future you're praying for requires a stronger version of you. It requires emotional maturity to handle criticism, spiritual depth to handle pressure, wisdom to manage resources, integrity to sustain influence. Those qualities are not downloaded instantly, they are developed gradually. And development takes time. Instead of asking, "Why is this taking so long?" consider asking, "What capacity is God increasing in me?" Because capacity determines sustainability. You don't just want to reach the blessing, you want to remain there. You don't just want to step into opportunity, you want to steward it well. If the delay feels long, it might be because the impact will be wide. If the preparation feels intense, it might be because the responsibility will be significant. God is not slowing you down to frustrate you, He is strengthening you to support what's ahead. When the time finally comes, you won't just step into something bigger. You'll step into it ready. Ready to carry it. Ready to grow it. Ready to sustain it. And that readiness will be the result of a season that once felt slow but was actually building strength for something far greater than you imagined. God works behind the scenes even when you see nothing. Just because you can't detect movement doesn't mean there isn't motion. Just because heaven feels quiet doesn't mean it is inactive. We often measure progress by what is visible, open doors, clear signs, immediate results. But some of the most significant work God does happens out of sight. There are seasons when you pray and hear no answer. You step out in faith and see no evidence. You stay consistent and notice no change. It can feel like you're standing still. But what if the stillness is only on the surface? What if underneath what you can see, God is orchestrating details, aligning relationships, shifting circumstances, and preparing moments that will eventually converge at the right time? Think about how a seed grows. Once planted, it disappears beneath the soil. For a while, nothing is visible. No leaves, no stem, no sign of life. But under the surface, roots are forming. Structure is developing. Strength is building. If you judge the process only by what you could see, you would assume nothing was happening. Yet the unseen stage is essential to the visible breakthrough. Consider Esther. Before her moment of influence arrived, there were countless unseen details falling into place, political shifts, personal positioning, timing that aligned perfectly. What looked like coincidence was actually coordination. What seemed ordinary was divine orchestration. By the time her moment came, it was clear that God had been arranging events long before anyone realized it. God's sovereignty extends beyond your awareness. While you're focused on one prayer, He may be handling 10 other factors connected to it. While you're asking for one opportunity, He may be adjusting hearts, moving resources, and clearing obstacles you don't even know exist. The silence you interpret as inactivity might simply be complexity beyond your understanding. The danger in waiting is assuming that because you can't trace His hand, He has removed it. But faith trusts even when it cannot track. Faith believes that the same God who spoke the promise is capable of sustaining the process. Just because you don't see progress doesn't mean progress isn't being made. There are conversations happening you haven't heard. Doors being prepared you haven't seen. Barriers being dismantled without your involvement. God does not need your visibility to accomplish His will. He works in places you cannot enter and moves in ways you cannot predict. The unseen season teaches trust. It invites you to rest instead of striving, to remain faithful instead of frantic, to continue planting, praying, and persevering even when the harvest has not yet appeared. One day, what was hidden will become evident. The alignment will make sense. The timing will feel precise. And you will realize that during the quietest moments, God was doing some of His most intentional work. The stage may have looked empty, but backstage, everything was being prepared for the exact moment you would step into what He had already arranged. The testimony will be greater because of the delay. What feels like wasted time today can become the foundation of your greatest story tomorrow. We often measure value by speed, how quickly something happens, how fast a prayer is answered, how soon a door opens. But God measures value by depth. Depth of character, depth of faith, depth of gratitude. The longer you wait, the more meaningful the breakthrough becomes. Imagine receiving something instantly. There is little room for appreciation, little room for reflection, little room to understand the journey that made it possible. But when something arrives after a season of waiting, it carries weight. It carries meaning. It becomes more than an event, it becomes a testimony. A testimony is evidence of transformation. It is proof that what once seemed impossible became reality. It tells the story of struggle, patience, and eventual victory. Without the delay, the testimony would lack depth. Without the process, the celebration would lack significance. The greater the waiting, the greater the story. When you look back on difficult seasons, you often realize they shaped you. They taught lessons you could not have learned otherwise. They strengthened qualities you did not know you needed. They prepared you for moments you could not yet see. The delay was not punishment, it was preparation. And the testimony that emerges from that preparation becomes powerful. People are inspired by stories of transformation. They are moved by evidence that change is possible. When you share your testimony, you give others hope. You show that setbacks are not final. That seasons of waiting do not define destiny. That God's timing, though different from ours, is always purposeful. A testimony also redirects credit. It removes pride and highlights gratitude. When something happens after a long wait, it becomes clear that human effort alone was not the answer. Something greater was at work. Something beyond strategy and skill. Something rooted in faith and purpose. The delay ensures that when the blessing arrives, it points back to its source. It becomes undeniable evidence that you were not alone in the journey. That unseen hands guided you. That unseen wisdom directed you. That what happened was more than coincidence. And because the testimony is greater, its impact is greater. It encourages others. It builds faith. It reminds people that their own waiting seasons are not meaningless. That their prayers are heard. That their efforts matter. That the story is still being written. So instead of viewing delay as loss, view it as preparation for a stronger testimony. The longer the wait, the louder the story. The deeper the struggle, the greater the impact. When the breakthrough finally arrives, it will not just change your circumstances, it will become evidence of faith, perseverance, and purpose. If this message blessed you, share it with someone who needs it.